Good morning. As Becky said, this is Jennifer Aiken. I am the case screen consultant at the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support. Um, my internet is not always that dependable, especially on a rainy day. I'm going to close the camera temporarily and continue talking, and then I will turn the camera back on for any questions at the conclusion. Um, I just wanted to take a few minutes to go over some tips for entering kindergarten students in Infinite Campus, just to ensure a seamless transition when uploading files to the Brigant's online management system. In order for the OMS to operate efficiently, kindergarten students must be entered correctly in Infinite Campus. Infinite Campus files are used to build the OMS files, and it's good to remind ourselves of a few things in order to decrease, hopefully, the number of issues we have in the OMS once it's open for entering student data. It's always important to use the student locator function when entering kindergarten students. It seems as though we probably shouldn't have to do that because they're kindergarten students, but it does happen. It's important just because they may have already had an enrollment, they may be repeating kindergarten. This way, it just helps to avoid possible conflicts with SSID numbers. So again, use that student locator. This is a screenshot where the student locator is found in IC. It's a great resource to provide to those that enter data in your district or in your schools that may not be watching this particular training. Um, if there is indeed an existing student list that is generated with the same name, it's important to compare those names that populate as they would here on the screen, and then compare the information, of course, to identify a match. If that student does not have a match or no matches are found as indicated here, then you would want to create the new student account. If you or as you're preparing the kindergarten student and enrollment information, there are two things that I really want to point out and emphasize on this screen or on this slide. It's important all kindergarten students are enrolled in a homeroom with only one homeroom course code, 703001 elementary homeroom. In the past, I think there have been other choices, but it is crucial that you use only this code for all elementary homerooms in order for the OMS to function correctly. Also, teacher names and corresponding district email addresses must be updated and entered correctly. Sometimes a teacher's name changes, so it's good to double check and make sure all of the changes are reflected in IC and would match what goes into the OMS. Both of these seem to be a very common hang up when we're trying to investigate issues in the OMS. So, along with those two things, these are some of the common pitfalls we find in Infinite Campus that create issues in the online management system for um, getting ready for K-Screen. So suffix field, birth date, enrollment type, homeroom, teacher information, and um, items in the reporting field, those are sometimes where we find very common and innocent mistakes in Infinite Campus. So the suffix, A lot of times we've seen where a student has a last name with a suffix and it's just entered into the last name field along with the last name. And this will cause issues with that student's record going into the OMS. Instead, there is a suffix field, and you would just remove it from the last name or make sure not to enter it in the last name field and then put it in the appropriate suffix field. Birth date. Um, I've been guilty of this common error myself, which is entering a current year rather than the actual birth year in the birth date fields or in a birth date line. Just try to be mindful of making sure that you're entering the year of birth rather than the current year. This example is the birth date is May 2nd, 2019. And if this were entered and it was last year, of course, the birth, it tells you that the age is 0. Clearly, that's not a student that would be eligible for kindergarten. This is a slide that indicates when you have the right information in the birth date year is correct, it will generate an age that would be appropriate for a kindergarten student. Enrollment types can also be entered incorrectly. It's important that the service type, which is where the green arrow is pointing, is P, primary. Sometimes this drop down box, sometimes there are other choices made there. It's just making sure that it is primary. Another thing to note, there is no arrow, but another thing to notice about this particular screen in Infinite Campus is the local start status and local end status. If a previous enrollment exists, especially, you want to make sure that these are correct and that they don't conflict or overlap. A state exclude error is another error we encounter when investigating issues that arise. Make sure that down toward the bottom of the slide in the state reporting fields that the state exclude does not have a check or an X in that box. And then the student homeroom information should be correct. The student should be enrolled in order for the classroom information to be properly set up in the OMS. You want to make sure this is a student screen, and you just want to make sure that they do have the appropriate homeroom assignment for period 1. The homeroom course code, I mentioned it before, and I want to stress again how important it is that the homeroom course code is 703001. Remember, this is the only choice for kindergarten homerooms. If a student does not show up in the OMS, check to make sure the student was enrolled in the correct homeroom and is attached to the correct roster in IC. And this is a shot that will show you, it demonstrates how to see if that person is indeed in the correct homeroom. Again, I made this point also earlier. Make sure the teacher emails are entered correctly and the names correspond. It is easy to make a mistake when you are entering email addresses. So make sure that you look closely. This sometimes causes issues with both classroom and teacher names within the OMS, as well as making sure students are generated in that particular classroom. Enrollment checks. Check to make sure again that these enrollments um, don't conflict with each other. If there are more than one, make sure that the grade is appropriate. Also, make sure that those start and end dates don't overlap and that they're correctly listed. Sometimes not having an end date, if there was more than one enrollment, will definitely cause issues in the OMS. Another important thing to keep in mind is that students cannot be entered manually into the OMS by either the district staff, no one at the schools, and certainly not KDE. This is simply a data file that is pulled from IC, and that generates the student lists. So if a student does not show up in the OMS, it can take 1 to 2 weeks for the student to roll in to that OMS and be visible. There's a data refresh weekly, and it can take up to 2 weeks before the student's visible, depending on how an error is identified and then at what point that's rectified in IC. Remember, patience is important when waiting for students to appear after the initial OMS goes live. It's important to begin checking your information, and we will let you know when the OMS is ready for you to check and to begin entering data. This seems to be an error in the in the slide deck. I apologize, but this is about entering prior setting data in IC. And I wanted to let you know that I am beginning to receive emails and phone calls about prior settings for students. You can begin collecting that prior setting information on kindergarten students right now. It can be done anytime. Data entry staff must view the prior settings video on the KDE Media portal. If you haven't developed a plan for entering that data, go ahead and work with your school and district staff to begin collecting and then entering that data. There is a prior setting form that can be downloaded from the Common Kindergarten Entry or the K-Screen webpage. It's a good idea to access preschool and Head Start rosters for reference. And remember that students may indeed repeat kindergarten. Also, it's likely that there will be multiple settings this year since there's so many changes in childcare due to the COVID-19 pandemic. If you get into IC and you see that a child care center, a Head Start facility, or preschool is not listed, or if you find that existing information to be incorrect in IC or addresses have changed, names have changed, please contact me directly. I will collect that information, do the necessary checks on our end, and make additions and corrections as necessary in IC in order for you to make sure that we do have the correct prior setting information for each child. This is just a few resources that I have available for you for K-Screen. The new implementation guide, which covers the entire K-Screen process, that is up on our webpage. It's the Common Kindergarten Entry website, the Common Kindergarten Entry Screen website that is listed here as well. Curriculum Associates, which is who produces the Brigants, they have a video series. There's a link there on the screen and in this PowerPoint for that. And then also, we developed an Infinite Campus K-Screen resource guide, which is a little more in-depth than what I've covered here on the highlights in this presentation. That is available as a link on the website, and as well, it's also included as an appendix in the implementation guide. So that would be important to give those who are entering data at the schools and at the districts so that they can keep these things in mind when they are entering the data. And now, if I'm here for questions, that concludes my part of this presentation. And then my contact information is on the screen as well. Are there any questions, Becky?
No, I'm not seeing any that have come in about Brigants or how they get that data into Infinite Campus. We did have some questions that came in a little late on the preschool session. So if you did ask a question that didn't get answered there, we will get those answers from Andrea and include those in our Q&A document when the sessions are over.